The palace did not like being surprised, which was unfortunate, because it had been surprised 17 times already that night. Each time, the same anomaly, a hooded figure moving through restricted corridors with access privileges that technically did not exist. Doors that rejected generals opened with a pleasant chime for him. Security lattices hesitated, recalculated, and politely folded aside. Once, a sentry drone spun in a slow, offended circle, as if trying to remember whether it had misplaced its authority somewhere earlier in the evening. The empress watched this unfold from a hovering projection table, her fingers resting lightly against one another. The light beneath her skin pulsed in thin lines along her neck, irritation, not fear. Fear was inefficient. What she felt instead was the creeping insult of improbability. "Explain," she said for the fourth time. Her advisors tried. One blamed a temporal echo. Another suggested a corrupted ancestral protocol. A third proposed, very carefully, that perhaps the palace was bored. That advisor was dismissed and reassigned to a weather moon. The intruder paused in the archive wing, right on schedule. He stood before a sealed chamber containing memories older than the empire itself, head tilted as if listening. He adjusted the hood, sighed, and tapped the door with 2 fingers. "Please don't," muttered a technician somewhere far away. The door opened anyway. The empress rose. Up close, she appeared almost human, which had always unsettled visiting diplomats, until they noticed the pupils that fractured like starlight under stress, or the way her hair shifted tone subtly, responding to internal chemical tides rather than fashion. Her species had evolved past spectacle. Control was beauty. She entered the archive chamber alone, dismissing guards with a glance. The room hummed softly, data suspended like frozen breath. The hooded figure turned, startled, as though he had expected a shelf to speak, not an empress. "Oh," he said, "you're earlier than anticipated." "That implies anticipation," she replied. "Remove the hood immediately." He hesitated, then shrugged with the air of someone who had misplaced a library book and decided honesty was cheaper than running. "All right, but I feel obligated to note that this usually goes badly." The hood fell. Her body reacted before her mind could intervene. Signals cascaded, ancient and unwanted, slamming through neural pathways that had never once misfired in her centuries of rule. Her vision narrowed. Her knees failed. The empire's most disciplined biology betrayed her in one catastrophic second, and she collapsed, robes tangling inelegantly around her legs. The man yelped. "Oh no, no, this is worse than alarms. Am I allowed to touch you? I really should have read the etiquette file." Guards burst in, weapons half raised, utterly unsure whether they were witnessing an assassination, a medical emergency, or the most offensive joke in imperial history. As darkness brushed the edges of her consciousness, the empress registered one final, absurd detail. The intruder kneeling awkwardly beside her, apologizing under his breath to absolutely no one in particular. The palace, offended and confused, sealed the doors behind them. The problem with waking up in an imperial medical bay was not the machinery, or the quiet, or the faint sense that several laws of physics were observing you closely. It was the audience. She opened her eyes and immediately closed them again, not out of weakness, out of strategy. Voices froze. Somewhere, a diagnostic tone made the sound equivalent of clearing its throat. "She's awake," someone said. "She blinked," someone else corrected. "That might not count." It counted last time. Her patience returned faster than her balance. "If any of you say my name," she said, eyes still shut, "I will personally audit your genetic privileges." Silence. Deep, respectful, terrified silence. She sat up. The palace medical systems had already compensated, adjusting gravity, temperature, and hormone suppression fields in a way that suggested mild panic. Across the room, behind a translucent containment veil that pulsed every time it detected sarcasm, stood the human. He raised one hand slowly. "Good news. You're alive. Bad news. I'm still here." Her biology twitched in response before she could stop it. She hated that. She glared at the ceiling instead of at him. "Explain," she said. "I would love to," he replied, "but every time I try, someone adds another scanner. I think I'm up to 17 now. One of them asked me questions about my childhood snacks." "That was relevant," a medic protested. She swung her legs off the platform. The systems protested louder than the medic. "Why?" she asked carefully. "Do palace doors recognize you as authorized personnel?" The human considered this. "Because I am very polite." That was not an acceptable answer. "Worth a try." Data streamed across the air between them. She absorbed it without looking, letting her implants do the work. Rescue incident, structural collapse, unauthorized survival, experimental reconstruction. The part she tried not to notice pulsed anyway. Her genome, borrowed. Spliced, integrated, she exhaled slowly. The room adjusted again as if embarrassed on her behalf. "So," the human said, rocking slightly on his heels, "either I'm in a lot of trouble or I'm about to be offered a very strange promotion." "You are a violation," she said. "Historically, yes. You should not exist. Also, yes, I've brought this up before." She finally looked at him, immediately regretted it. Her system reacted like a traitor flooding channels she had sealed generations ago. She clenched her jaw. "Do not move." "I wasn't planning to. Last time someone collapsed." A beat passed. "That," she said coldly, "will not happen again." "Fantastic. For the record, I did not enjoy being the cause. It's very bad for self-esteem." She stood. The veil flickered, uncertain whether to stop her. It decided against it. Everything did, apparently. "What do you want?" she asked. He blinked. "I was hoping you'd tell me. I broke into the archives because I was trying to find out who I am now. Turns out the answer is complicated." Her palace hummed, unsettled by the symmetry of it. "Until further notice," she said, "you will remain within this sector." "Am I detained?" "No." "Am I free?" She considered the question, then surprised herself by smiling, just slightly, just enough to confuse the room. "Neither," she said. "Welcome to the problem." The palace tried to solve the problem by holding meetings. This was, historically, how it had failed at most things. She sat at the center of a circular chamber where decisions were supposed to become inevitable through repetition. The human sat several steps away, not because he had been told to, but because every chair he tried rejected him with a soft but judgmental vibration. "It's not personal," he muttered to the furniture. "I've offended worse." The council argued in layers. One thread debated legal precedents. Another argued biology. A third was devoted entirely to whether the human counted as an object, a citizen, or a medical error that had learned to walk. The palace translated all of it directly into her mind, and she regretted inventing that feature. "He cannot remain," one voice insisted. "He cannot be removed," another replied. "He technically outranks 3 bloodlines," a third added, sounding nauseous. The human raised a hand. "For clarity, I would like to outrank 0 bloodlines." No one acknowledged him. This irritated the palace, which had grown fond of his habit of saying things no one approved of. She cut through the noise. "Enough." Silence obeyed immediately, though it sulked. "Your solution," she said, addressing no one in particular, "assumes the problem will stay still." The human leaned closer. "Problems rarely do. I once tried to outwalk one. It followed me onto another planet." "That explains nothing." "It explains my resume." She ignored the impulse spike that came with his proximity. Instead, she reviewed the data again, slower this time. The regenerative protocols. The emergency decisions made without oversight. The quiet theft of her genome justified as temporary, optimized, reversible. None of those words had aged well. "You were rebuilt to survive our systems," she said. "Yes." "You were not designed to trigger." She stopped. He waited. "To trigger what?" She chose honesty over dignity, which was unusual and deeply annoying. "Me." He absorbed that without humor, which worried her more than the jokes. "I didn't consent to that," he said finally. "No," she agreed. Neither did I. The council stirred, relieved to sense mutual outrage. The palace dimmed slightly, a gesture it used when conversations approached dangerous clarity. "What happens now?" he asked. She stood. The chamber reconfigured instinctively, unsure whether this was escalation or escape. "Now," she said, "you stop trying to understand yourself through stolen memory. And instead, you let the present finish reconstructing you." That sounds suspiciously like waiting. "Yes." He grimaced. "I'm bad at that." She almost smiled again. Almost. Later, time behaving itself only out of courtesy, he found her in a transit corridor arguing with the palace. "I don't care if it's optimal," she said. "I want the long route." "It's inefficient," the palace replied directly into both their minds. "So am I," the human said, stepping into the conversation like it owed him money. The palace paused. Rerouted, sulked again, they walked. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. She answered without hesitation. "No." "Good, because I'm terrified of you." She glanced at him. The reaction came, uninvited but quieter now, like something learning it was not in charge. "Why, you're the first person who looks at me and doesn't see a miracle or a mistake," he said. "You see responsibility." "That," she said, "is worse." He laughed. The palace logged the sound, confused but pleased. For the first time since the archive chamber, the future did not feel like a trap. It felt like an argument that had only just begun. The solution arrived the way most honest solutions did, late, imperfect, and slightly annoyed that everyone else had taken so long. She convened no council. She asked the palace to mute advisory layers, which it did reluctantly, like a parent allowing a bad idea to proceed so it could learn on its own. The human stood beside her at the central interface, hands clasped behind his back as if that made him less likely to accidentally outrank someone. "I want to be clear," he said. "Every time this room lights up, something irreversible tends to happen." "That is governance," she replied. "You'll adjust." She initiated the protocol herself. The archive responded immediately, unfolding its oldest permissions, those written before empire, before control, before the assumption that biology could be bullied into obedience. "You're dissolving the claim," he said, reading faster than most of her advisors ever had. "Yes." "On you." "Yes." "And on me." She paused only long enough to feel the echo of instinct protest and then override it. "Especially on you." The palace hesitated. "This will destabilize several dynastic assumptions," it warned. "Good," she said. They were tedious. Data rewrote itself. Genetic flags dimmed. The involuntary responses faded, not erased, but quieted, like an argument finally conceding it wasn't the only voice in the room. She felt the difference immediately. Not emptiness, choice. The human exhaled. "I feel lighter." "You should," she said. "You no longer belong to anyone." "Never did," he replied gently. "But thank you for making it official." The palace chimed. "Identity status." She glanced at him, self-defined. The words settled between them, solid and earned. Later, much later, when the empire had absorbed the shock and survived as it always did, they stood at a departure gate that pretended not to be sentimental. He had declined titles, compensation, and an offer that involved a throne-adjacent committee with too many vowels. "So," he said, "no destiny, no biological imperative, no emergency reconstruction clauses." "Correct." "And if I come back," he added, "it's because I choose to." She nodded. "Then you will be welcome." He smiled, not carefully this time. "You've changed." "So have you." "Fair," he said. "I used to think survival was enough. And now?" "Now I think consent matters more." She watched him step toward the threshold, the palace parting without comment. For the first time in centuries, it did not